session where we have Nobel Laureate Professor Abhijit Banerjee speaking with Ms. Asha Jadeja on how we can, nurture entrepreneurship to kickstart the Indian economy and the Indian economic growth. Asha Jadeja is a Silicon Valley-based technology entrepreneur and investor. She's invested in over 200 startups in Silicon Valley and all over the world. She's specifically interested in the India-US corridor and the partnerships over there. And her Motwani Jadeja Foundation does a lot of work to nurture young entrepreneurs in India and give them exposure to the US markets. She's also passionate about elevating poverty in India. And so therefore, talking to Professor Banerjee makes so much sense to understand how they're going to do that. Asha has been a TiE charter member for the last 20 plus years and a passionate supporter of TiE. Over to you, Asha, to take this session forward.
Vijay, thank you so much, and congratulations on hosting a fantastic TiE Global in these virtual times. I wanted to start out today by, first of all, thanking the audience. I know we have over 40,000 registrants today, and we have a lot of interest from the global community, including from the Singapore FinTech Festival, which came as a surprise at the last minute. I wanted to, of course, introduce Professor Abhijit Banerjee, who, frankly, needs no introduction, but somebody who all of India is so proud of. Professor Banerjee is an Indian-born economist who is a Nobel laureate, as you all know, in economics, and a professor of economics at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And Abhijit and his wife, also a Nobel laureate, Professor Esther Duflo, have been instrumental in setting up the Poverty Alleviation Lab in India. And as a result, as we speak, as we address this whole question of poverty and growth in the Indian ecosystem, especially in the tech ecosystem, tech-driven ecosystem, I think I feel like we are lucky to have Professor Banerjee agree to join us today. Who better than somebody like him who has written some phenomenal books on the topic, including the ones most of you are probably familiar with. But these include things like Poor Economics, a radical rethinking of a way to fight global poverty, good economics for hard times, making aid work, what the economy needs now, and various books like this. So I feel that today we are addressing a very unusual topic in an entrepreneurship summit. Normally we talk about sort of opportunities for startups. What are the verticals where startups can make a dent, can actually excel and grow? Which markets can it grow in? We normally talk at this TiE Global or tech summits in general. We talk about what are those openings, what are those new markets where startups can have a growth potential. So today we are doing something very different. We are actually going to be talking about the fact that India is, still a very poor nation. We 300 million people still don't have electricity. We have a nation where poverty is our problem, and whether we like it or not, whether we talk about it or not, it is a huge problem. And unless we start shining a light on what are the opportunities for growth going forward, we are not going to be tackling this problem head on. So I'm going to start by inviting Professor Banerjee to give us his read on what he sees as the immediate sort of opportunities for growth in India, what could be some of the barriers, and what is his current work involved in. And then we'll have this conversation sort of back and forth. So Abhijit, over to you about sort of the question being, why is India poor and why is growth urgently needed right now?
You just start with the easy questions. Thank you for having me, and thank you, Asha, for getting up at an ungodly hour to speak to me. I think I'm not going to attempt to say why is India poor. That's what books get written about. But I think to make this contextual, I would say that let's think about this moment for India. What is it that what are the constraints we face right now, and then maybe what we need to do we should talk about what we should need to do for let's say the medium run. I think the long run is too long, but what would it take for us to even go back to the growth we had before 2012? I think we've been in a growth slowdown essentially since 2012. How big the slowdown is disputed. Arvind Subramaniam, who was chief economic advisor to Mr. Jaitley, claims that our growth is overstated by maybe 2.5 percentage points. So we were growing very slowly, almost at the Hindu rate of growth, 4% already after 2012. So 2012, there's a slowdown. Clearly, there's a slowdown. Nobody disputes that. The question is how big a slowdown and what to do about it. This is critical because we have, while I think it is true that we have been done better than maybe in the 90s or the 80s in terms of government policies to reduce poverty, I think that the truth be told, even now, that the biggest piece of poverty reduction has come from growth. Now, it's very, very important to spell out how that's happened, because I think it's not that there is some, you also know that essentially in terms of good jobs, we're an economy that isn't creating good jobs. In fact, we just lost, if anything, people's estimates go between 4 and 20 million good jobs. I think 20 million is an overestimate. People have said that. I don't even think we had 20 million good jobs, so I don't think we're going to lose all of them. But I think we lost a bunch of them. But so it's not because of the reason why growth contributes mainly to poverty reduction is not through the good jobs, it's through the bad jobs. It's mostly through jobs in construction and in the low end of the service sector. That's where the jobs were. Until 2012, if you see where the jobs are growing, they're growing in transportation, they're growing in food delivery, they're growing in restaurants, they're growing in construction. It's a domestic consumption-led boom that's driving it. It's not, the exporting industries are not using a lot of our labor. Our labor is being used primarily in domestic consumption driven industries like construction, like restaurants, like ordering out food. It's package delivery. All of those things are playing a major role in the way we've grown. Now, what does that? Why do I say that? I say that because it means that it means two things. One thing it means is that these are jobs typically where there isn't really a lot of potential for skill upgrading. So young people who are 18 are going into these jobs, but then for a lot of them, it's sort of a dead end because, and they recognize that. And you see, it's one fact about India that's rarely emphasized, that if you look at a 26-year-old with 10 years of education, 25% of them are not working yet. They're looking for a good job, but they don't want to settle for what they can get. By the time they're 32, they're pretty much all employed because at some point they give up and take a job. At least till the last data we have, there was no dearth of low-end jobs. People at 35 were all employed. All males at 35 were employed. Female employment is a separate and very worrying question in India. We have lower female employment than Saudi Arabia, I believe. It's kind of a remarkable, less than Bangladesh for sure. So we're really in a very unique, that's a very unique problem we face.
So are you counting the informal economy, Abhijit?
Yes, people who say they're employed. Now, then there is people who work in farming. That's a kind of a, so who's working in farming is a hard question, and but that's true in Bangladesh, it's true in Pakistan. We really are kind of special. This is well documented that we're really, and it's been falling. The female labor force participation has been falling. But let me not get into that. I want to go back to what I was saying. What I was going to say is that there was no dearth of low-end jobs. People don't want low-end jobs. They wait, and then they take it. Those jobs, so that's one thing. The second thing is that those jobs need infrastructure, which we don't actually have. What infrastructure? Well, we need both, I think, a social support infrastructure and residential infrastructure. So if you look at where these people stay, they sleep under their truck, they sleep in the shop, they sleep in the construction site. What does that mean? That means that they really have very uncomfortable lives. They don't stick at any job for very long. After 3 months or even less, they go home. They really are not the adherence to a job is very low, which means skilling is very low. They're not getting skilled because they're not really in the city for long enough. They work at one job, they get tired of it, it's horrible, the conditions of life are horrible, they go back, they take a rest in their village and they come back. So we know that this very short-term migration means that there isn't really much investment in skill upgrading. So I think if you think about what is happening, people are getting jobs. There were, at least till recently, plenty of jobs to be had, jobs that people don't necessarily want, but lots of those jobs, those, construction, delivery, the food, cleaning, lots of hospitals where you could easily get a job as a cleaner, as a nurse's aide, as a, putting bedpans. Those jobs are available.
So Abhijit, let me stop you right there and say, let me have you talk a little bit about the post-pandemic world. Now, we have gone through this almost a year of the pandemic right now. The world as we knew it has turned upside down. And we know that people are working virtually, are doing things, a lot of things virtually. There's a lot of food, things like, as you just mentioned, food delivery to communication a lot of it is happening virtually. And for the first time, there's also a massive kind of an overlap between computation and health as far as the tech industry goes. We are seeing an explosion of startups in that space of sort of AI marrying medicine. And so there is that whole different explosion of activity that's coming in the post-pandemic world. Do you see kind of unusual, radically new opportunities that are likely to arise in the Indian ecosystem as India becomes, and India, the post-pandemic world, Abhijit, I think is also one where everybody recognizes that global collaboration is a must. There is no way we can solve any of these problems, whether it's climate crisis, whether it's terrorism, or whether it's pandemics, unless we were globally clued in. So where do you see those opportunities arising as we come out slowly from this post-pandemic world, and where computation is marrying medicine?
Asha, I'm the wrong person to answer this question because it's not what I follow. Let me say some marginally relevant things, but it's not going to be what I really wouldn't know. To the extent that, let me say a couple of things. One, I think the global evidence suggests that the effect of AI on employment is negative. There is actually good work, particularly by my MIT colleague Daron Acemoglu, suggesting that there is the effect of AI on good jobs is negative. So if anything, I would say this exposure to AI will create further pressure on the demand for good jobs. Is there as many good jobs being produced? I would say that the global evidence on AI suggests maybe not. So if anything, I would say the worries are that AI will actually displace some of these jobs, because in particular, India, a lot of these jobs are extremely, they're management intensive jobs. They're not really jobs where, people take individual responsibility and do creative things. They're just, I make sure that you deliver the right food. So it's a jobs that where if AI can replace some part of it, it would be perhaps quite economical. And that's sort of what the evidence for the US in particular is, that jobs being displaced by AI tend to be exactly those jobs of not the manual labor jobs and not the high-end jobs, but the jobs in the middle. And that also goes for the BPO sector, because the BPO sector is competing very much with, for example, AI in like, for example, if you prescription records or insurance records and things like that. There has been actually these are actually the exact sectors where we are going to struggle to keep the jobs. So I think if the only part of this story I know is one that is to me is worrying, which is the part that says that AI displaces these jobs, and we already suffer massively from a scarcity of good jobs. There are plenty of bad jobs, as I was saying. Now, having said that, I think you're right in pointing out that one can be pessimistic and just assume that it's all going to fall apart. That's not me. I don't want to be pessimistic. I just want to say that right now I don't see the pathway towards these dots being connected. There will probably be a dot, but the way typically income distribution has sort of trickled down has been through domestic consumption. So I am assuming that what will happen actually is first that a bunch of more people will get rich and they will spend money. And that's where our most of our growth for the poor has come from the middle classes actually spending money. And I think that we need a burst of optimism, of spending, of people buying. That's the quickest link. All the other links are 10-year links or something. But right now, I think the quick link between the well-being of the poor and the well-being of the middle classes comes from consumption. And so I think if we have a new consumption boom that comes after the pandemic, which I think is not unlikely because there's pent-up consumption, I think reassuring people that the economy will be stable and that they will actually get the middle classes, that they will actually prosper, is going to be key in getting them to spend. I think right now people are sitting on their hands, they don't want to spend their money. The government has been observing.
So Abhijit, speaking of consumption, let's speak a little bit about credit. What is your sense there right now on credit, that consumer, individual credit? How is our banking sector doing on that in India? And is that something that are you seeing good trends there?
There's a new report by the Reserve Bank, which I think is at some level treading on grounds which need to be tread on. Whether it's right or wrong, there'll be some debate about it. But I think it's very important to talk about, for example, involving foreign banks in the Indian banking sector. I think we are one thing we shouldn't. I think once we take on the view that the banking sector needs more private ownership, I think restricting it to Indian ownership is, to me, a mistake. I think we have some ideological view that Indian capitalists are somehow good capitalists and foreign capitalists are bad capitalists. But there is, to my mind, we are staring in the face of any number of very cynical defaults by Indian capitalists. That's what's actually, our banking sector is in a complete mess right now. That's what the Reserve Bank report is reacting to that. We have, enormous bad debt, and we actually have no way of even writing it down unless we get some capital inflow from abroad. I don't think anybody else will have the deep enough pockets to write down that debt. What we need, the reason why we need that debt written down is that the banking sector, in a sense, is a zombie banking sector, a lot of it, because they're sort of the living dead. They don't really have, they all kind of know that if you really examine their books carefully, a lot of them are not actually viable. They're in the red.
Yes.
And
you're referring to both public and private? Are you talking about both?
Some private, bunch of NBFCs, and a lot of the NBFC problem has been somewhat mitigated over the last couple of years, but still a bunch of NBFCs and a bunch of public banks are all sort of in the red, or their books are so non-transparent that nobody knows. But if you think of what the pandemic did, the pandemic essentially force the government to bail out borrowers. That's the one big thing it did. And the reason it did it is that it was an indirect way of bailing out the banks, which were all going to go under. If everybody defaulted, the banks would go under and then the government would have to bail them out. So a huge part of what the government is calling its fiscal effort is went to bail out borrowers. It basically wrote down debt, and so that reflects a deeper and longer problem, which is that we have a kind of a banking sector which is in the state of being half dead. They're not lending because they really don't have the capital to lend, because they really are, they have had so much bad debt that they're kind of handicapped. And I think we need an infusion of a huge amount of capital. And that capital can come from abroad much more easily than they're going to come from India. So I think this idea that we're going to be suspicious of foreign capital in banking, I think both overstates how loyal our capitalist class has been. Forgive me for saying this, but they have shown no whenever they want to escape to somewhere else with our money or put their money in Mauritius or somewhere else, they've done it, and we know they do it. So why? And I think just our need for capital. I think we are really, the amount of capital we need to recapitalize the banking sector and make it, energetic, willing to lend. I mean, it's banking booms that have coincided with growth booms. When credit was easy, the economy grew. And now credit is expensive. In real terms, India has one of the highest interest rates, and our banking margins are among the highest. The gap between the borrowing rate and the lending rate of banks is among the highest in the world. We really are we need to do something about the banking sector. We've been sitting on this problem. I've been writing about this problem since, I would say, 2001 or 2, so 20 years. And the problem has only got worse in those 20 years. I have
a question, Abhijit, based on something that I just ran into last week at the Pan IIT conference. One of the things that I saw some of my startups, speaking about, which I was asking them, I was like, what do you guys think of the regulation in the Indian, ecosystem, tech ecosystem, that what is stifling your own growth, or what is stifling your aspirations to go public, let's say on NASDAQ, and bringing in profits from outside? What's going on there? And the overall feeling I got from these startups is that there are these restrictions, like 51% has to be owned by Indian, equity owners, 49% by outsiders, and so they were saying that these kind of restrictions, which are they seem arbitrary and random, they seem to be scaring away investors from coming in from India. So the venture capital guys who want to invest in some of my startups, for example, if they cannot take a fully voting stake in my startups, why would they want to come in? So what are this whole 51%, 49% thing that the Indian regulatory system seems to have imposed, even on the tech sector? Do you think is that likely to go? And if so, when and what are the factors that could trigger that?
I think I'm going to sound cynical, but I am a bit cynical about this one. I feel that this is effectively a subsidy to the Indian capitalist class. That, this way capital remains, the good companies remain cheap for them to buy up. And I feel that we've always sort of tried to, we were scared of competition. I remember 1991, everybody saying that, we just get creamed, China will take over, whatever. Nothing bad happened. The most important fact about 1991 is 1992 is already a positive growth year. There's 1 year of negative growth, then we start growing, and we're growing 5% in 90. There was no disaster. We very quickly, when faced with competition, we adjusted very quickly. And we have the talent to do it. We just need to light fires under them. And then I think I think when we do it, they manage. It's not that we have completely been washed out of all the markets where the Chinese enter. Where there was already competence, we managed to hold our own. There was also this view that the whole tech sector will be completely taken over by China at some point. In the Indian tech sector would complete, and it didn't happen. So I really don't think that we should be frightened. And I don't think we should, but I think that discourse of, foreign capital, for dangerous, etc., that's a dangerous discourse. I think for us, we should just, I don't think it's the case that foreign capital is more irresponsible than Indian capital. I say this with some, I'm scared of all the people who are going to get upset with me, but I really think that there is no particular reason, no evidence that foreign capital, this is a colonial mindset. We are where, there was a time when the colonists controlled us. They used their capital along with state power to abuse us. But that's been a long time. We're now, almost $3 trillion economy with a lot of confident people. I think that means we if we want to handle it, we can handle it. We can use regulations which make sense. But I think we've been really being defensive, which suits, I think, our particular groups of our capitalist class, because they have cash, they can pick off whatever is going cheap. The talent doesn't get the money. The people who have the cash get the money. And a combination of a dysfunctional financial sector and these restrictions means very much that there are strong...
There, I think I want to share with you certain optimism that I'm feeling recently. What's happening is that till now in the tech sector, there was always this fear. You're right that there's been this post-colonial mindset in India which says, oh, foreign money, it's irresponsible money, it's greedy money, and things like that. What's happening now, though, is that the money pouring in from the foreign tech sector into India, investing, whether it's in Flipkart or whether it's in, Jio or something. These are all guys. Now there is I think there's a lot of reassurance in the mindset of Indian politicians, even Delhi, that foreign tech money is largely run by, as you all know, most of the foreign tech companies are now run by Indians. This is diaspora Indians running Google, Microsoft, you name it, IBM, and if these companies are making investments in India, they are not coming with a predatory view. There's a different mindset that the Indian, the political system, the leadership needs to have now, and a more of trust in the Indian diaspora as we try to make a comeback into India. What I've noticed, for example, one of the things that I saw, which alarmed me a little bit, is that the investments from Facebook and Amazon that happened in India should have happened directly into the Indian marketplace. The Indian tech ecosystem should not have actually gone through Reliance. But that's fine. That's something that alarmed me in the beginning. But right now, I'm assuming that this is a hedging kind of a strategy that the Indian government seems to be taking to minimize, to mitigate some kind of risk of foreign capital by going through Reliance. Again, I don't fully understand that. But my hope is that going forward, we will not be going through either Reliance or Flipkart or anything else. We'll be people like myself, venture capitalists like myself, will be able to invest in India directly into the startups that we like and not be having to go through any kind of oligarchic pressures. So that's something that I see.
I hope you're right. I hope you're right. I've not seen that direction. So far, I would say the recent policy moves have been very protectionist. So we see, I hope you're right. I see no reason for it. To be honest, I think we should have the confidence that we can manage. And, I think we have enough, we have shown enough success when we had the opportunity to do so. So I don't see a reason to be defensive. But I think there is this neo-colonialist discourse that's constantly used to, in a sense, protect people who I don't particularly think deserve protection.
In terms of sort of from a macroeconomic perspective, right, Abhijit, as in the post-pandemic world, as you see that the world is learning that it is do or die, it has to collaborate globally. As far as India itself goes, right, do you see that are you saying that the growth from exports so far has been like a small percentage? Is that likely to grow if if we have more participation in the global economy? What do you think?
I think that global. I think the issue is not that. I think in a sense we export more of our GDP than China. Okay, it's we're quite open. I don't think it's the question of being open, of openness per se. I think we have put some tariffs. I think those have no particular reason to exist in many cases. I think there are political pressures, etc. But I think that mostly it's more that the exports don't connect very much to the exporting industries are typically high end. They tend to be so there is very little, other than in agriculture, there is very little connection between the people on the ground, the poor, and the exporting, except through consumption, that's what I was trying to say before, that we can talk a lot about our new companies and unicorns and this and that. But if you think about those companies and how does that link to the man in the village in Bihar, it's because his son is working on a construction site in Bangalore, where somebody who had made money from Flipkart is now building a house. That's the channel. And so I think that's key to understand, that we haven't yet built what China has done, which is a direct, he creates the jobs and the guy from Bihar goes to take that job. That doesn't happen. And we sort of known that for a long time, that to the extent that we are successful, for example, in manufacturing, it's typically like auto parts or something where we have pretty high skilled workers. We don't have like the guy from Bihar who has no education or very little education, very poor education. Those are sort of stuff that I spend my time working on. That guy doesn't usually get those jobs. And I think that's something we need to, for the longer term, we need to think about that, which is how do we make a connection between all these opportunities that you are seeing and you know much better than me, and the person in rural UP or rural Bihar or rural West Bengal or rural Rajasthan. I mean, that connection is weak, and it goes through these very low quality jobs, and I think that's the challenge to me.
Got it. So, Professor Banerjee, we have about 5 more minutes left. So, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions that I've also got in my, in my inbox. What are you excited about personally? What are you working on right now in the, sitting in Paris, that you are excited about? What are your secret projects going on? What are the book projects in the pipeline? Can you share with us? Can you divulge some of that?
Yeah, it's not a secret. I would say I'm very interested in the pandemic has made it very clear that we need to think much more about sort of computer-based education for the masses. And one thing we're working with Pratham on is what's the impact of giving tablets in villages to. So there's a set of things where I think technology has mostly failed, and that's the evidence. But where it has to succeed, we have to make it work. It's not a choice, because I think the relative price of teachers to computers has fallen from 10 to 1 to 1 to 10 or something. It's just computers are so cheap now, and teachers are relatively so expensive that we just have to make it work. So there is innovation going on. There are successes, few success stories, but if you sort of, what we haven't yet understood is what is the recipe. It's like one success happens, but we haven't quite pinpointed the recipe for when technology does the job. And we want to sort of push the boundaries of that. If it's really like one specific pedagogy that you implement through a computer, that's too narrow. We need to be able to widen that to allow people to learn in their own ways and create a wider ecosystem of. And there, I think most of the evidence has been even, for example, my MIT colleagues, they came up with one laptop per child. There are a bunch of randomized control trials of those, which suggest they do nothing. So I think we need to solve that problem. So one thing that excites me is to solve the problem of getting better education. And I think that's a matter of, I think, many things, including some things which have nothing to do with the computer, but have to do with the teachers' attitude towards what material they're using, not to deliver answers, but to provoke questions. And I think that whole changing the entire infrastructure of teaching is especially important for the disadvantaged, because the advantage get it somehow or the other. Their parents teach them. The disadvantage really need the school system to work better. And I think I'm one thing I've been spending lots of time thinking about in the recent few months actually on how to get the education system to work better. That I think is going to be critical for I think sharing success without an education system that really works is very hard. And that's sort of what I was saying about the bad jobs being the only option people have. And I think that it connects to that. So I'm interested in skilling and the whole range of issues which have to do with, why do people not want to get skilled? Our skilling investments have mostly been failures. We have a study where we had 538 people, I think, who joined a skilling program. And I think after 6 months, 38 of them were working on the skills that they were